In this podcast, I will analyse the case of Salomon and Salomon. This case established the principle of separate legal personality, a principle where a company is a separate legal person distinct from its shareholders. However, to constrict the case to one principle is to decontextualise it from its cultural and socio-economic background. The aim of this video is to explore the disparity between the verdicts of the British courts and the commercial realities of Victorian Britain. In addition to this, the video will explore to what extent the judgments of the courts mirror the patriarchal nature of England during the 19th century. So let's get down to the facts. Aaron Salomon directed a family business as a leather merchant and boot manufacturer in Whitechapel, London. In 1892, a limited company was formed under the Companies Act of 1862. The reason for this was to extend the business and make provision for his family. He subscribed a nominal capital of £40,000. His wife, his daughter, and his 4 sons had 1 share each. Salomon allotted £20,000 to himself. As part payment for the business, the company issued him debentures, secured by a floating charge on its stock. Upon liquidation, Salomon claimed that he was entitled to be paid in priority to the unsecured creditors. Speculation over the legitimacy of Salomon's family business began in the High Court. John Adams critiques that Salomon tied his family too closely and for far too long to his business activities. And the views of Judge Williams illustrate this fact. He held that the company was
mere nominee of Mr. Salomon's,
and that Salomon wished to avail of all the benefits of limited liability to the detriment of his creditors. The result? Salomon was ordered to indemnify the limited company. Salomon appealed. The Court of Appeal held that the formation of the company was a
mere scheme to enable Salomon to carry on a limited liability company.
Lord Justice Lindley held
the object of the whole arrangement is to do the very thing which the legislature intended not to be done.
And Mr. Salomon's scheme is a device to defraud creditors. Lord Kay shared the same opinion, and based on this reasoning, the court closely supported the judgment of Williams and held that the appeal must be dismissed. There was a turn of events when the House of Lords quashed all of the preceding decisions. A clear shift to the literal interpretation of the Act occurred. Lord Watson, in particular, outlined
the holding of a single share affords a sufficient qualification for membership.
Re-emphasising this principle, Lord Halesbury held that 1 share is enough. The modern impetus of this principle is reiterated by Ford, stating, if the shares are fully paid up, it cannot matter whether they are in the hands of one or many. Salomon was judged as a one-man company, although it was held by Lord Macnaghten that he did not act fraudulently. The final judgment was that Salomon's actions were not contrary to the true intent and meaning of the Act. As we saw before, the High Court viewed Salomon's families as mere nominees of Mr. Salomon, then defined again by the House of Lords as members. The involvement of Salomon's wife never went further than the acknowledgement of her existence. Mrs. Salomon was a central factor that could have been used to absolve accusations regarding the sincerity of Aaron's business. However, each court brushed aside the investment that she made. She was not acknowledged despite the fact that she had provided an injection of capital after the business started experiencing difficulties. By doing this, Mrs. Salomon was a listed creditor to the firm. This fact would have helped to show that her husband was not a man who sought to evade legitimate business debts. Instead, the reputation of the Salomon family was disgraced. So the obvious question to ask is, why was Mrs. Salomon ignored? The answer is that consideration for women as wives and partners was not a concern to the courts. So although Mr. Salomon was capable of bestowing separate legal personality to his company, Mrs. Salomon was incapable of having a separate legal personality from her husband. Though women would soon gain more rights through a variety of legal initiatives, she was subjected to the doctrine of coverture. Her rights were covered by the rights of Mr. Salomon. The fragile personality of women is documented by Peter Spender. She notes that even a woman who supported herself had no defense against the prodigal husband who returned at intervals to take over her earnings. This illustrates the routine subjugation of women, which was evident in Mrs. Salomon's marginalisation in the judgments of the Victorian courts. So, now we know that the Acts of 1862 defended Salomon's business. But to what degree did they defend his reputation? Salomon was considered a fair-dealing businessman before he sought to be paid in priority to the unsecured creditors. He was regarded as a prominent member of the London shoe trade, and he has enjoyed an unblemished reputation for probity. Upon liquidation, Salomon sought to rely on his legal rights, to be paid what he was owed by the company and to protect his family. This conflicted with the view in the business community that a man should pay his debts. Although Salomon did what hundreds of others have done under similar circumstances, he was painted as a grasping merchant in an anti-Semitic London. The reasoning of the lower courts mirror the commercial realities of this situation. Each lower court stated that Salomon's activities were fraudulent, but they never provided any definitive proof. They simply held that he had abused the machinery of the act. The fact that the literal interpretation of the very same act in the House of Lords absolves Salomon of any fraud shows the lack of evidence provided by the lower courts. So although Salomon won his case, the destruction had already taken place. MacNaughton estimated he would retire with £10,000 in his pocket. However, when he died, his personal estate was worth £503, far from those expectations. Scholars commonly know Salomon and Salomon as establishing the principle of separate legal personality. However, this case is also significant for other reasons. Salomon mirrors the patriarchal nature of England during the late 19th century. The commercial realities of Whitechapel, not the law, secured Aaron Salomon's fate. Before he died, he saw his business reputation as not merely tarnished, but demolished along with the company. Therefore, this case is proven to be much more than one which established a principle. Salomon's life is testimony to this. Before he availed of the privilege, Salomon's company was an award-winning valuable asset to the community. After he availed of the privilege, Salomon died in poverty, and his family name was tarnished. The problem lies beneath the jurisprudence, which was a clear reflection of commercial Victorian Britain. The trading community would not extend the privilege of incorporation to Salomon's family business, even if the legislature and the Parliament were willing to do so.